It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Podcast. We are presented by DraftKings. Love those dudes, mainly because they're huge sponsors of the show, but also because we love DraftKings Best Ball. More on that momentarily. Use the code ROSS, please. As well as we love the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Again, code ROSS. It's happening. By the end of the day, every NFL team is in training camp. I had tweeted on Sunday that there would be more, by the way, at Ross Tucker NFL, most of you know that there would be more NFL news this week than there had been the last 2 months combined. I think that's actually already happened, and we will get into that because that's what Joe and I want to talk about is some of the news that has already come down the pike. When I'm talking about Joe, I am, of course, talking about the great Joe Dolan at FG_Dolan on social media. You can also check him out over at fantasypoints.com. We are big fans of that website. The data suite is just insane. Make sure you use the code 24Feast when you do so because it is incredible. Joe, I've got some best ball news. We've got a lot of other news to get to, but I wanted to start. I actually yesterday listened to last week's episode that I missed, and I think that might be the first of my podcasts I've ever missed. So what does that tell you, Joe? It tells you, A, I have trust in Jack, who I thought did a fantastic job.
Agreed.
Made me feel very replaceable. Producer Jack, but also that's how sick I was. Dude, I had the stomach bug for a good 5 days, but Tuesday and Wednesday, I went a straight 50 plus hours without eating anything. So Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, nothing. Somehow I rolled out and did the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, and I just said, I think Jack said, do you want me to handle the Fantasy Feast? And I said, yes. Yes, I do. I'm going back to bed. The good news is, Joe, I lost like 7 pounds. The bad news is I gained 6 of it back. So it was a short-lived diet, Joe.
Yeah, it was. I was like, maybe I should try that. I've tried everything else, but no, it sounded miserable, Ross. I mean, I don't like being sick. I've been coughing for like 2 weeks. I thought it was allergies because they dug up and resodded my lawn. And my cough started right away. And then it's kind of migrated to my chest, and it feels exactly like when I had COVID the first time. And it's lasted for 2 weeks. Like I said, when you get to be my age, I turned 38 today, by the way. But when you get to be my age,
oh my gosh, happy birthday, Joe!
Well,
That's incredible.
My mom
That's officially late 30s. You're definitely not mid 30s anymore.
I think there's like 2 NFL players who are older than me. So
wait, let me guess. Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers is definitely older than me.
Mercedes Lewis.
I don't even know if Mercedes Lewis is older than me.
It's year 19. It kind of has to be.
Yeah, I feel like it. Oh, yeah, he's older than me. So, all right, well, at least there's 2. And I still don't think there's any head coaches who are younger than me. So at least there's that. But when I started in this industry, I was 22 years old, and now I'm 38. But when you get to be my age and you have a coughing fit for 2 weeks, your core hurts like you've done 500 crunches. Like, I'm getting up and I'm like, I got my lower back pain, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's because I've been coughing nonstop for 2 weeks. So that's been what's happening for me. But Ross, I'm glad you're feeling better, and I'm glad we can chop it up with. We've got actual news, like people reporting to camp, and now you always have to sort through the muck and the mire, because I feel like beat writers, and I'm not blaming anybody, but beat writers are so excited to see live football that they're going to be like, oh my God, there was talk about AJ Dillon yesterday, the best run I've ever seen him have. And, you have to sort through that muck and mire. But like when we get guys who are in contract disputes and they're reporting to camp. That's tangible stuff that we can work with.
Absolutely. There's a lot to get into. I wanted to make a couple mentions as it relates to DraftKings and Best Ball, Joe, before we dive into the news. All of the guys that are in the first Best Ball, 2 weeks ago was nonstop travel for me. For those of you that follow me on social media, at Ross Tucker NFL, I know a lot of you follow us, at Ross Tucker Pod. So it was Vegas for the Mountain West Media Days, and then Dallas for O-Line Masterminds, and then last week I was sick. So we should be getting the link out today or tomorrow to start our first Best Ball draft. So all the guys, Matt and Thad and James and Robert and Joel and Alejandro, David, Aaron, James, Ryan, David Mentier, we should be getting that today or tomorrow. So I apologize for the delay. It is 100% entirely on me. DraftKings has been ready to roll for multiple weeks. I also want to announce the first 3 contestants for our second Best Ball draft, which will take place in August. Jason Costa, come on down. Scotty Boyd, Adam Cawthorn. Trying to look and see what they did. Adam Cawthorn rated and reviewed the show on social media. That's pretty easy to do. Jason Costa did the same. And then what Scotty Boyd, this looks like a receipt of kind. Oh, Scotty Boyd used the code 24Feast to get the discount on the fantasy points, Joe. He sent his receipt in. I love that, Scotty. So I'm seeing his fantasy points receipt right here. That's amazing. Nice work there, Scotty. So those are the first 3 as a reminder. Fantasy points code 24Feast. Can always check out the show on YouTube as well. YouTube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Okay, so Joe, out of the stuff that's happened so far, is there something that's most notable, such as Amari Cooper? There is no concern. They took care of him. They're happy. He's going to be there and be the featured guy.
Yeah, Amari Cooper is a good one. This is probably the most significant because they actually altered his contract. So Amari Cooper, there isn't like, oh, he's just being a good soldier and reporting so he doesn't get fined. They actually altered his contract to pay him the money. So he is there. There is nothing to worry about. And as a matter of fact, I really like Amari Cooper at his ADP, which is around wide receiver 28. He's very affordable. He kind of slips through the cracks. He's one of those guys who I think has got, everybody knows is a good player, but we've never kind of put him among the elite wide receivers in the league, and maybe that's fair, but he's a very good fantasy contributor. I really like him at his ADP. He is an essential player for them this year. Obviously, they traded for Jerry Jeudy, but Amari Cooper getting his money makes him a guy I'm actually kind of excited to target because he can be part of any sort of strategy you have. He can be a really good number 3 receiver. Sorry, Ross. He can be a really good number 3 receiver on a wide receiver heavy team, or if you kind of went running back heavy, or maybe you drafted a quarterback or an elite he could be a good number 2 receiver in that regard. I like him at his ADP. I'm glad the Browns took care of him.
So am I. By the way, Deshaun Watson had some really positive things to say about Amari Cooper. On some level, Joe, Amari Cooper is almost like the Kirk Cousins of wide receivers, in the sense that he's a very good player. He doesn't really do a lot of spectacular things. It's not a lot of wow plays. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It feels like he's just consistently good, but you don't see a lot of Amari Cooper highlights. It's just like after the game, he had 6 catches for 112 yards. It's the same reason why he doesn't wow people, just like a quarterback like Kirk Cousins doesn't really wow people. He's just good.
Yeah. He's a player who people aren't excited to draft, and that kind of makes me excited to draft him. I mean, here are some of the names he's going after. He's going after George Pickens. Well, who knows how much the Steelers are actually going to throw the football, although Pickens is very clearly their number one. He's going after Zay Flowers, who is the Ravens' number one, but you could argue that a lot of his production profile was fraudulent last year. He's going after Tank Dell. Tank Dell is the third receiver drafted from his own team. And I like Tank Dell a lot, but I'm just going to point out that Amari Cooper is pretty damn affordable. We'll see if his ADP takes a hike here after they took care of him. But I really like Amari Cooper. This was tangible news that really solidifies him as a main target for me. And no, it's not exciting, but he's been great with the Browns. I think Ross, it's beyond evident at this point that the Cowboys made a big mistake and misread the market when they traded him away, especially to pay Michael Gallup, who just retired. So I think it's a very just smart move by the Browns to take care of a guy who's been one of their best players over the past couple of years.
So you mentioned the Michael Gallup thing. I just want to point this out, and I might mention this as well on tomorrow's Ross Tucker football podcast with Greg Cosell, because I didn't get to this on today's Ross Tucker football podcast, which by the way was great, with Steve Palazzolo of Pro Football Focus. Gallup, Joe, is somebody we need to talk about from a fantasy football perspective because of this. He showed a lot of promise a couple years early in his career.
Yeah.
He actually made some highlight reel plays. He is an example of ACLs are not just no big deal. You know, we've gotten to this point where you think, oh, a guy has an ACL, no big deal. Joe, he's never been the same player. And I don't know if there's something else that was wrong with his knee, but he's never been the same player, Joe.
I think the overwhelming majority of the time, modern technology and modern medicine has allowed guys to recover from ACLs close to full strength, if not full strength. But you're 100% right. This is a perfect example that sometimes maybe the rehab doesn't go well. And also, Ross, I've never had an ACL injury. I've never had a serious injury like that. And I certainly have never had a serious injury like that and then had to rely on that injured body part to provide a living for me and my family. The mental aspect of it, often to me, that seems like it would almost be the hardest part. Like, what if it goes again, you know? And I don't want to put thoughts into Michael Gallup's head. I don't know where he was coming from. He certainly has made good money in the league, but maybe he just didn't want to go through. Like we went through this with Andrew Luck, right? Andrew Luck said, I was tired of rehabbing. It was just
the worst.
It was a full-time job to take incremental steps to go back to doing something that is designed to get you hurt, which is what football is. And I mean, you're 100% right. It's just a perfect example of never assume that a guy is going to be okay. And I don't think people do, but I do think we sometimes do take it for granted. We do. You
know, just as an aside, because I think this is the value I provide sometimes. So, Joe, after my fourth year, I had started 13 games for the Buffalo Bills that year. I had a back surgery, okay? Here's how I would describe it. I was probably average at best explosiveness and like athletic ability / agility, right? Let's just say I'm average. Well, after the back surgery, I was a little bit less explosive, a little bit stiffer, and I never started another regular season game.
Wow.
And I had started 25 by that point. So what I tell people is like a little bit can be a difference between starting and being a backup. A little bit can be a difference between being a backup and being out of the league, because that little bit makes the difference. Like, that little bit could be whether the running back gets through the hole or not. Little bit could be whether or not I make the block or not. Little bit could be whether or not Gallup gets enough separation or not.
Yeah.
Like, a little bit is the difference. There's not like huge differences between guys. It's little differences, and the injury, that little bit. So I hung around for like 3 more years, but I could tell I wasn't quite the same.
Yeah. And we'll see what Michael Gallup says, if he says anything. You know, and when we talk about the Cowboys making a mistake trading Amari Cooper and paying Michael Gallup, that's just me talking about what the Cowboys did as an organization. I am glad Michael Gallup got taken care of. I am. I'm glad for Michael Gallup, and I hope that he made enough money with that Cowboys deal that he's able to sit back and say, I gave it my all. Now I can ride off into the sunset.
Speaking of the Cowboys.
Yep.
Nothing's handled yet, Joe.
Nope.
Nothing's been handled yet with Dak. CeeDee Lamb is holding out. I'm not sure I really understand why guys hold out at this juncture, but some of them do, when they can find you, whatever. But CeeDee Lamb holding out. I still tend to think, Joe, he's not going to miss any games.
Agreed.
So I guess from a fantasy perspective, if there are people that this spooks them, and his ADP drops, is that time to pounce? Because he's not gonna miss games.
I would be absolutely floored, Ross, if we are sitting here on September 1st and CeeDee Lamb doesn't have a new contract. Look, I know the Cowboys have made Cowboy fans smack themselves in the head 100 times the past few seasons with a "what are you doing" kind of deal. But if they don't sign CeeDee Lamb, I'll be utterly stunned. There have been enough wide receiver deals to get done for the Cowboys to have a decent framework of what to pay CeeDee Lamb. He's not going to get Justin Jefferson money, but he's probably going to get pretty close. That's the way I feel. And, Jerry Jones obviously loves to think about the glory days of the Cowboys. Ross, I don't remember this exactly, but I believe it was the 1993 NFL season. Emmitt Smith, I believe, was the defending NFL MVP, and the Cowboys were coming off a Super Bowl championship. Jerry Jones didn't want to pay Emmitt Smith. Emmitt held out into the season, and I believe the Cowboys started 0-2. Because they didn't have their best offensive player, even the defending Super Bowl champions couldn't survive that. And then Jerry capitulated. He was like, all right, I got to pay Emmitt. I don't think he's going to repeat that. I still would take CeeDee Lamb as the number 1 wide receiver, the number 2 pick. If we're sitting here in a couple of weeks and things are still not done, maybe we'll see a shift to Tyreek Hill being the number 2 pick or Jamar Chase being the number 2 pick. But as we stand on July 24th, I am not concerned. I think the Cowboys will get a contract done with CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really more about who's first, CeeDee Lamb or Dak. If they can get something done with Dak, that would make it a lot easier to get something done with CeeDee Lamb.
I don't know if they're going to get something done with Dak.
You think there's a chance that they're just going to let it play out?
I think there's a chance this is Dak's last season as a Cowboy. I do. But
wow.
CeeDee Lamb is the Cowboys' best offensive player. They will take care of him. I would be floored if they did. I don't know why they haven't yet. That's something only Jerry can answer. But I would be floored if they didn't take care of CeeDee Lamb.
The other major wide receiver conversation, Joe, revolves around Brandon Aiyuk.
It does.
And the San Francisco 49ers. Now, he's asked for a trade, but he has reported to training camp. And I guess my question is, it certainly sounds like the Niners are fully intent on keeping him this year because they're trying to win the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, and I think Brandon Aiyuk, him reporting to camp, I mean, is this a Marshawn Lynch deal, which we'll get to Alvin Kamara, or is this, hey, he realizes he doesn't have any leverage and he might as well get the money he's owed? This is the phrase I've been using for Brandon Aiyuk. Is he going to get the money he's owed so next year, next offseason, they pay him the money he's earned? And at least go get the money you're owed. This is good news for fantasy football. It's good news for the 49ers. I don't think Brandon Aiyuk is going to miss games. I just don't think that's going to happen. So at this point, I think his second round ADP is going to hold. I just talked to John Chapman of the 49ers Rush podcast. He said 99.9% Brandon Aiyuk is in a 49ers uniform. He doesn't have leverage. The 49ers don't have any incentive to trade him. And I think Brandon Aiyuk is probably going to realize that. Go out, ball out, maybe end up in another uniform next year with your $100 million contract. But I just don't think he has leverage. You know, they could tag him after this year. They could tag him again. What's he going to do? Miss three? It's not going to happen. He's going to play for the 49ers this year.
Can I ask you a question, Joe?
Yeah.
It felt like Aiyuk didn't really – it felt like, he was kind of inconsistent until this past season. I guess my question is he really that good? Are we sure he's that good?
Oh, I think he's awesome.
What's that?
I think he's awesome. Okay.
I want to make sure because this is important because he's in that offense that is a really good offense. You know, they've got other people that sometimes defenses focus on. Kyle Shanahan has a track record of being able to feature a receiver. Yeah, I guess I just wonder, are these other teams really willing to spend, multiple big picks to give this guy $30+ million a year?
I think Brandon Aiyuk is awesome, and I actually kind of think Brandon Aiyuk is almost underrated because he's not, and I don't want to insult Brandon Aiyuk by saying he's not unique. That's the wrong way to say it. It's that he's kind of more of like a traditional number one receiver. Meanwhile, the 49ers have Debo, who is a one-of-one kind of player, right? Like every year we go into the NFL draft and we're like, oh, he's the next Debo. Because everybody knows what Debo's role is, right? He can play running back, he can play receiver all at once. Nobody really goes into who's the next Brandon Aiyuk? It's, who's the next Debo? In fantasy football, it's who is the next Christian McCaffrey? Who's that running back who has the ability to go 1,000? And Brandon Aiyuk might be overlooked simply because he's just a really freaking good ass-kicking wide receiver as opposed to one of these players who's like an archetype for this game-changing type of player. He's just awesome. He's a great X receiver. He's an incredible downfield threat. He's great after the catch, but he's not a running back who handles 30 touches a game, nor is he Debo, who can take a jet sweep to the house at any time. So I just feel like maybe he's underrated because he's just really freaking good at playing one position. I think Brandon Aiyuk is awesome. And I think if the 49ers don't have him, that's a massive loss to their offense, especially since Ricky Pearsall, the rookie receiver, has a hamstring injury. So he's dealing with an injury right now. So if Brandon Aiyuk isn't out there, they lose a lot, including the guy that they drafted to replace him. They don't have him right now. So that's a huge loss for the 49ers. I think Brandon Ayuk's an awesome player, and I do think he will get the $30 million, whether that's from the 49ers or another team.
Pretty crazy that he averaged 18 yards.
18 yards a catch
last year. 18 yards a catch. And, 2022, he had a better year than I realized. He had 78 catches for over 1,000 yards in 2022. For me, it felt like he really burst on the scene this past year, but he was pretty good the year before that too, Joe.
Yeah, he had 1,000 yards. He's just kind of gone about it quietly on one of the loudest teams in the NFL. Oh, it's Shanahan. Oh, everybody's got to have the arguments about Brock Purdy. Is Brock Purdy elite? Is he propped up by the system?
Kittle's personality.
Kittle's right. Brandon Aiyuk just kind of slips through the cracks, and it's like, hey, wait a minute. I had 1,400 yards last season. I'm just as good as A.J. Brown, who got $100 million. That's kind of where he's coming from, and I understand it from Brandon Ayuk's perspective.
And I would say this too, Joe. I think we should make the point about Pearsall that you did. It is not good for rookies to lose reps.
No.
It's not good. I'm not saying it's good for anybody, but it's especially bad for rookies because they don't really know the offense. So yeah. I would not be in some of these leagues. I bet you his ADP will drop, and it probably should because Kyle Shanahan wants to be able to trust the guys that are out there, and it's hard for Ricky Pearsall to show that he's trustworthy if he's not out there. Check this man out on social media. There'll be a lot more news and notes next week at FG_Dolan. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. Other than that, I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.